Graphic audio. A movie in your mind.
Graphic Audio presents Marvel's X-Men: Days of Future Past by Alex Irvine. Adapted from the graphic novel by Chris Claremont and John Byrne. Copyright Marvel. Narrated by Richard Rowan. With performances by Emlyn McFarland, David Coyne, Nick DePinto, Dawn Ursula, Michael John Casey, Tara Giordano, Andy Brownstein, Helen Pafumi, Eva Wilhelm, Matthew Bassett, J.W. Roan, Chris Davenport, Patrick Bussink, David Harris, Christopher Sheeran, Gregory Linnington, Dylan Lynch, Tim Pabon, Deirdre Starnes, and Thomas Penny. Cold wind blew from the north down the deserted stretch of Park Avenue, somewhere in the East 70s. Kate Brad remembered walking these streets with the X-Men as a girl. She'd been, 13 when she first joined up? A lot had changed in the last 20 years. Everything had started to fall apart so fast after she joined the X-Men. But the past was past. There was no changing it. Kate, like every other mutant still living under Sentinel rule, couldn't afford to look back or look forward. All they could do was try to survive every day. But maybe, just maybe, they were about to change that. She, Aurora, Peter, Franklin, Rachel, and Magneto. And Logan. It all depended on Logan. Kate had hurried through her delivery, trying to get ahead of schedule so the Sentinels wouldn't be suspicious of her. They could track the location of her inhibitor collar, so she didn't dare take the shortest route between Hunter College and the bus stop at 5th and 79th, where she could board and ride back to the South Bronx. The buses didn't stop on every block like they used to, and most of the subways weren't running at all. It was a death sentence for mutants to travel alone through the disused tunnels, or most other places in the city. They were safer in the camp. This particular neighborhood was hardcore rogue territory. The rogues were a criminal mafia now, more or less, but they had their beginnings in the organized anti-mutant militias of the 2020s. Of all the places in the city for Logan to want to meet, he had to pick rogue territory. It made a kind of sense, since the Sentinels didn't even bother monitoring this part of the city. The rogues did their work for them here. New York was honeycombed with underground warrens and tunnel complexes. It always had been. And now, with the Sentinels patrolling the surface, underground pathways were even more important. The rogues controlled many of the subterranean crossroads in this part of Manhattan. They didn't like the Sentinels, but they liked mutants even less. This part of Park Avenue had been the scene of a number of guerrilla battles, back when people were still resisting the Sentinels. Now it was strewn with wreckage and rubble. Parts of the sidewalk were gone, the gaps overlaid with sheets of plywood, corrugated roofing, anything people could find. New York City, once one of humankind's great achievements, was now an endless series of lethal booby traps, especially for a mutant alone. That was what Sentinel Rule had done. Ruthlessly adhering to their mutant control directive, they had crushed any and all resistance, destroying large swaths of cities to root out their enemies, and leaving the rest lawless ruins. The majority of mutants were dead, and most of the rest had been relegated to the South Bronx internment camp that Kate was returning to now. There weren't enough mutants left to make a difference to their own fate. At least that was how it seemed most of the time. But maybe they were about to do something about that. She didn't dare hope exactly, but for the first time in 10 years, Kate could conceive of hope. The plywood sheet under her foot gave and tilted, spilling her not into a hole, but down a steep ramp into darkness. She tumbled and landed hard, realizing that she'd walked into a trap, and in rogue territory, that could mean only one thing. The three men looking at her from the other side of the room were rogues, and she was in a lot of trouble. It was some kind of living space, with filthy mattresses along the walls. The three men stood looking at her with malevolent glee, around a tabletop covered with the remains of 1,000 melted candles. The walls were lined with rusted and bent metal shelving units, some of which still had ancient canned goods on them.
Hey, look what we got here.
The rogues were known to costume themselves in outrageous ways. This one wore a mohawk, feathers in his hair, and face paint. He was flanked by a Mad Hatter and a bedraggled-looking frontier type, both with clubs.
Oh, little Mutie tripped and fell. What are you doing out of the camp, little Mutie?
Sentinel business.
It was true, not that it would do any good. She was returning from a delivery. She had permission from the Sentinels. What she had delivered were samples of mutant tissue. Where she had delivered them was an experimental facility built into what had once been a science lab at Hunter College. It was still a science lab, but the people working there now weren't professors. They were handpicked by the Sentinels for two qualities: scientific expertise and hatred of mutants. The latter was a quality the rogues shared. All three of them were looking at her throat, exposed when her coat had come open during her tumble down the ramp. The Mad Hatter stepped forward.
Inhibitor Collar says you're fair game, little Mutie.
All three men closed a ring around Kate.
And even if you are on Sentinel business, we hate them almost as much as we hate you.
Beg all you want, sweetheart. Scream all you want. Even if people hear, no one's coming to help you. You're gonna be a long time dying, Mutie.
Maybe so, Kate thought, but she wasn't going to just let it happen. Expecting her to be cowed, Mohawk came a little too close. Kate snapped a straight kick right up into his gut. Mohawk doubled over, dropping to his knees. These sounds came from somewhere in the darkness, beyond the reach of the candles on the table. Were the other two fighting over something? Over her? Kate scrambled backward away from Mohawk.
Bravo! George! Get her! Hold her! I'm gonna flay this Mutie alive!
No, you're not, bub.
And from the darkness stepped Logan.
You're gonna step back from the lady, or join your two pals here in the land of traumatic brain injuries.
Relief crashed over Kate. He'd tracked her, he must have. But had the Sentinels tracked him? If he hadn't used his claws, they wouldn't have noticed any mutant activity, unless they'd developed some new surveillance tech. She didn't know. They were always creating new ways to find and kill mutants, and mutant sympathizers, or anyone else they thought might oppose their plans.
You giving Big Alex orders? On his own turf? Is that what you're doing, short stuff?
Big Alex drew a knife.
Cool. I like to earn my fun. You want the little Mutie, old man? You come get her.
If you say so. But don't say I didn't warn you.
Oh! Ah!
Kate's heart had jumped into her throat when she'd seen Logan's hands drop to waist level and his fists turn over, just as they always had right before he unsheathed his claws. But this time he hadn't done that.
You okay, Kate?
I'm fine. But calls this close, I can live without.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
He looked up the ramp and listened for a moment.
Come on, let's roll.
When they were out on the street again, Kate started to relax. At least as much as a mutant in New York under Sentinel control could ever relax.
So tell me, Colonel Logan, how's life in the Canadian Resistance Army?
Thrill a minute, darling. The word from London is that everything's on automatic. The minute the Sentinels start to move out of North America, every nuclear power is gonna launch a full-scale strike.
Then it's up to the X-Men.
It felt good to say that, as if the words could give the X-Men the power they'd once had.
So what else is new?
Logan held out his hand, palm up, displaying a small machined piece of metal. It was a short tube with a set of coils around its middle and a disc attached to one side of the coils.
Here you go. Last bit of the jammer. The FCA eggheads made it out of an alloy that shouldn't show up on the Sentinel scanners. You ought to be able to walk right into the camp with it.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, it is. Phase 2 begins at midnight sharp. You'll see the sign I left. Be ready.
We will.
She paused, not quite ready to leave him yet. Seeing a free mutant was wonderful, inspiring even, but knowing she would soon be walking back through the gates of the camp made Kate want to run away. Maybe to Canada, but she couldn't leave her friends. As she had said, it was up to the X-Men.
Logan, you think this will work?
It better. There are 1,000 warheads pointed at us and some itchy trigger fingers on their buttons. The second Europe thinks the Sentinels are moving out past North America, we're gonna be so much ash up in the jet stream.
Something about this image struck Kate. It reminded her of her life before the inhibitor collar, when she had been able to phase. The feeling of individual molecules passing through her body, the incredible rush of knowing you could do something that maybe only one other person in the world could do. A lot had changed, but maybe they could change it back.
Get on home, little kid. You don't want the Sentinels looking at you too close.
Kate zipped up her camp jumpsuit over the jammer component, tucked into a tear in the inside lining.
We won't get another chance, will we?
Nope. If this doesn't work, we're all gonna die, kid. Simple as that.
Right.
That's why it has to work. Catch you later. You know when and where.
Yeah. Later.
They had already said more than was prudent, given the possibility of Sentinel surveillance. Kate felt Logan's eyes on her as she walked the last few blocks to the bus station. She made her way across 5th Avenue from Central Park, where the 79th Street Transverse Road disappeared into the forest. It had been a long time, more than a decade, since New York City had last maintained the park. The buses themselves hadn't run on diesel or natural gas or electricity for years. Now they were pulled by teams of horses. As she approached the buses, she was keenly aware not just of her inhibitor collar, but also of her camp coverall, which bore a large black M on the back, branding her as a mutant. As part of the Mutant Control Act of 2019, the Sentinels and their human abettors had issued classifications. H meant regular human, free of active mutations or genetic predisposition to them. This group didn't have to dress or conduct themselves in any particular way, but many of them wore a block H on their clothing as a mark of pride and genetic purity. The letter A stood for anomalous, a category of people whose genomes contained the potential for active mutations. A's could not breed and were required to display their letter. And then there was the letter M. The only time an M was seen in the general populace was when the Sentinels sent one on a specific errand, as they had Kate. Attacks on mutants outside the camp were rare, but only because it was highly unusual for a mutant to be granted the privilege of exiting the base. Kate held that privilege dear, both because it was necessary to the plan and because it gave her a chance to see what was becoming of the United States of America. On the other hand, if that plan worked, she would never have need of her exit privileges again. In Canada, according to Logan, things were a little better, but only because Canadian mutants had seen what was coming. Soon after Project Wide Awake went active, they'd had time to plan, to get out of the cities and make themselves as hard to find as possible. Logan didn't share much with Kate because neither of them knew when the Sentinels might interrogate her, but she had gathered from passing references that the Canadian Super Team Alpha Flight might still be alive and active, somewhere northwest of the Great Lakes. Not that Alpha Flight could do her any good from that far away. If the fragmentary remains of the once proud X-Men were going to stave off a nuclear devastation of North America, they would have to do it from the South Bronx. Kate got off the bus near Yankee Stadium. She crossed the parking lots to the camp gates, where 2 Sentinels stood guard. One of them spoke as she approached.
Mutant 187, you are behind schedule. Explain.
Kate chose her words carefully to keep the Sentinel sensors from detecting hesitation or omission. She'd rehearsed possible responses for days, anticipating this scenario.
I was attacked by rogues on Park Avenue. I escaped. That caused the delay.
Encephaloscan indicates truthful response. Proceed.
Luckily for Kate, the Sentinel did not interrogate her further. It would have been very easy to get caught in a lie, which would likely mean execution on the spot. If the Sentinel were even slightly uncertain, it would subject her to a process of exhaustive and humiliating interrogations that might uncover the jammer component. That would end the plan before it ever had a chance to begin. But none of that happened. Once she had passed through the security checkpoint at the gate, Kate walked along the fence line, staying away from the maze-like interior of the camp. It was dangerous in there. At the time of its construction, the camp had been organized into 3 sections. The first, near the front gates, consisted of a group of low buildings housing a research lab, medical facilities, and administrative offices. Most of the original mutant inmates were now in the cemetery that occupied part of the space between the administrative complex and the main body of the camp. Here, a long double row of barracks stood in front of crumbling row houses. The whole capacity of the place had never been dedicated to mutants. From the beginning, it had also housed normal human resistors and various other unfortunates deemed undesirable by the Sentinels. Some of these were members of anti-mutant groups whose violent tendencies put them on the wrong side of the Sentinels' desire for order. Theoretically, they were not supposed to come into contact with the dwindling number of mutant inmates. In practice, the Sentinels looked the other way. A number of the mutants buried in the cemetery had died at the hands of other inmates. The most recent casualty had been Kurt Wagner, the mutant called Nightcrawler, just a year or so before. After that incident, the Sentinels had confined the mutants to a single building in one corner of the camp, where sentries could keep a closer eye on them. Eventually, Kate knew the Sentinels would achieve whatever research goal they had set themselves, and then they would kill the remaining mutants. Until then, however, the mutants had their own housing, with its own kitchen to keep them out of the camp dining area. The original barracks buildings had been modified over the years, their clean, regular lines transformed into a jumble of makeshift barriers, catwalks, tunnels, and covered passages that reflected the balkanization of the camp population. The non-mutant inmates came from various gangs and groups on the outside, and they brought those affiliations in with them. The Sentinels didn't care unless violence broke out. When it did, their reprisals were swift and brutal. Several times since Kate had been brought to the camp, Sentinels had burned part of it down. Then the inmates rebuilt, further altering the original orderly layout. Just as no mutant would willingly go into rogue territory on the outside, no mutant on the inside would willingly enter the non-mutant warren. Kate headed for the medical facility, sticking to the open spaces within sight of the Sentinel guards posted along the fence. She walked by Kurt's grave and tried not to look at all the others. The past was past. She had to stay focused on the future, on making sure they would have one.
I'm returning this medical case.
All right, you may go.
The medtech didn't even look her in the eye. To them, she was subhuman, an aberrant strain, a genetic dead end, soon to be eliminated from the species. Maybe some of them didn't believe that, but in the camp it didn't matter what you believed. What mattered were your actions. And the H-class humans who worked for the Sentinels were utterly complicit in the ongoing mutant genocide in North America. Thinking of it made Kate wonder whether maybe Magneto hadn't been right all along. On the other hand, Magneto himself had traded in his former militancy for a weary, plodding cynicism. Mutants were too few and too far gone, perhaps, to believe that militant action would do any good. Unless the jammer worked. Kate thought about the rest of the X-Men and caught herself before the thought went further. It was easy to still think of them as the X-Men, but really, the X-Men had died when Charles Xavier died. Now they were just the rest of the surviving mutants, the last great hope of mutant kind in North America, and maybe the world. And those mutants were waiting for Kate in their small, prefabricated sheet metal barracks. She stepped inside and immediately felt safer.
Kate.
First to meet her inside the door was Aurora Monroe, Kate's guiding light when she'd first come to the X-Men, all those years ago. The intervening years showed in a slight rounding of Aurora's features and figure, but she was still strong and graceful, with an air of calm command that belied her X-Men name, Storm.
It's very good to see you.
Just behind her came Franklin Richards, who, having reached middle age, had the same pattern of gray at his temples as his late father, Reed Richards of the Fantastic Four.
We were starting to get worried.
Rachel Summers looked up from a table in the common space just inside the front doorway. Her red hair had been chopped raggedly short by her own hand. Her face was perpetually drawn and pale, as if she hadn't had a good night's sleep in decades. Rachel was something of a mystery to the rest of them. Even Franklin, whom Rachel had married soon after being imprisoned. Kate knew nothing about Rachel's past, which seemed to be a forbidden topic of discussion. This had always struck Kate as unfair. Rachel was a telepath, and therefore had probably learned everything there was to know about the rest of them before the Sentinels had forced an inhibitor collar on her. Hanging back from the group was Magneto in his wheelchair. He'd been crippled by a Sentinel raid on his secret base in the Caribbean, during which all of his closest Brotherhood lieutenants had been killed. He looked much the same as he always had, his face already lined and his unruly shock of gray hair never changing. It was odd to see, in light of how the others had aged.
Sorry I'm late. I ran into a rogue pack.
Are you all right?
Kate's own husband, Peter Alexandreyevich Rasputin, moved to her. It had been a long time since anyone called him Colossus. Even when he wasn't transformed into shining organic steel, as he had not done for many years, he was still a mountainous presence.
Yeah, they ran into Wolverine.
He didn't do anything, did he?
No, nothing that would draw the Sentinel's attention. Logan's smarter than that.
It's not his intelligence I question, Kate. It's his temper.
Well, I have the final module. Logan's gonna do his part at midnight like we talked about. Phase 1 has to be complete by then.
Phase 1. How normal we make it sound. And yet what we contemplate is so fantastic. I still cannot believe it is possible.
Strange words, Pyotr Alexandreyevich, coming from one who's seen and done the things you have.
Magneto moved his wheelchair slowly forward. He was no longer an enemy. There were too few mutants left to permit differences among them, but he still remained somewhat aloof from the other 5. Old enmities took longer than 20 years to fully die out.
I have ever been a simple man, old friend. More farmer in my soul than superhero.
And maybe just what we need. A little touch of the new Soviet man. Optimism, the will to move forward no matter what the cost. If there were any alternative, we would take it. But if we do nothing, the world will be at war by tomorrow. By the day after, North America will be craters and ashes. Our actions may not make things better, either for us or for humanity as a whole, but we certainly cannot make them worse.
How easily he slipped into the role of leader, Kate noted. He spoke for them all, incorporated their concerns and fears, and turned them into strength. No wonder he had been such a dangerous enemy.
My dear Rachel, so much depends on you tonight.
I won't fail, Magnus. I've been meditating all day. Once the jammer's operational, we can start any time.
Then what are we waiting for?
A moment, my wife. Would you excuse us, Magnus?
Of course.
I have my doubts. Can this work? And even if it can, should it? We are proposing to toy with the basic fabric of reality. What happens if we succeed? What might we unmake?
He took her hands, an oddly courtly gesture against the backdrop of the camp.
We ourselves, this love of ours that has survived so much, it might cease to exist along with the Sentinels.
That's a risk we have to take, Peter. What does the love of 2 people matter against the lives of billions? I don't even know what will happen to the younger me. I might unmake myself. But if our love was meant to be, it will be. We must believe that. Only this time, it will be in a world where our children can grow up free and unafraid. The Sentinels killed that, along with our children. If changing the past holds out even the slightest hope of undoing that, I'll do it, no matter what else the cost.
His head was bowed as he listened to her, and when she finished, he looked up with a sad smile.
I love you.
And I you, Peter, from the moment we first met.
You were only 13, Katya. Just a girl. No, love came later.
And it will still be there for us after I do this. I need you to believe that. If you don't believe it, how can I?
Then I will.
An hour later, the jammer was assembled, and they had cleared out the small room. All of them gathered briefly for a last consultation.
Kate, we cannot know exactly what will happen when this projection takes place, but you may be certain that the X-Men of 22 years ago will be highly skeptical. If I am remembering correctly, you will appear in the immediate aftermath of Jean Grey's death. The team will be grappling with that and with Scott Summers' decision to leave the X-Men for a time. Aurora, does that match your recollection?
Yes, exactly.
Are we sure this is the best way? Seems to me we're risking everything on a plan that, as powerful as we all know Rachel to be, really isn't likely to work.
If you have a better idea, Franklin, we're all listening.
Franklin looked at Rachel much as Peter was looking at Kate, a man uncomfortable in the knowledge that he was going to be a bystander while his wife took the lead, but also a man plainly worried for her, because none of them knew what was going to happen in the next hour, perhaps the last hour of their lives.
None of us has a better idea. We've talked this to death. It's time to act. If we are to die, let it not be passively.
Indeed. I spent much of my childhood in a place like this. I will not end my days in one.
Franklin held his wife's gaze a moment longer.
All right, let's do it then.
Rachel, how much time do you think you need to prepare?
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I've never done anything like this before. A few minutes of quiet to gather myself, then let's try it.
There's not going to be any trying it. Either we do it or we're all dead.
That's really helping me focus, Franklin.
I know. I'm sorry,
Magneto held up a hand. Franklin cast a worried look back at Rachel, then led the others out of the room.
Be cautious and deliberate, Rachel, but do not take too much time. Midnight is coming and we will only have one chance.
Then Magneto too was gone. At last, Rachel had a few minutes alone. She could prepare, could gather herself for a feat that even she did not know whether she could accomplish. She could ensure that Kate's persona survived the wrenching transition from this time to her teenage self, anchored 22 years in the past. She could also stew over past misdeeds and perform the fruitless calculus of transgression and atonement. How many good deeds, how many lives saved could balance the years she had spent as Ahab's hound, hunting down fugitive mutants in the early years of the Sentinel takeover? None of the X-Men knew about her history, and Rachel wanted to keep it that way. Her sins were private. They knew her last name because the human staff of the camp used it, and Rachel had touched their minds enough to know they had drawn their own conclusions. But with so few mutants remaining, all of them knew better than to ask too many questions when the answers might create resentment and division. Sometimes she thought of telling them. It would be cathartic to unburden herself, but that benefit had to be balanced against their possible reaction upon learning that she was responsible for so many of their friends' deaths. On the other hand, she had done what she had done to survive. That was the simple truth. If it did not give her peace, at least it allowed her to live with herself. Guilty self-examination did not do much for her concentration. Rachel sat down and focused her thoughts. She slipped into the nourishing cadence of meditative breathing and stayed there, letting only the present matter. She had survived the massacre at Xavier's school. She had survived the purges and anti-mutant lynchings after that. She had done what she had to do to survive. And when she looked back at all those years, she could not believe that any path to redemption still lay open to her. Franklin believed in her, but perversely that sharpened her own self-loathing. She did not deserve him. She would, she feared, fail his trust, as she had betrayed the trust of so many others before him. Then they were walking back into the room, and Rachel no longer had the luxury of self-doubt.
Are we ready?
Franklin was the only one who approached Rachel. He took up a protective position behind her, hands resting on her shoulders.
I need a little space, Franklin.
He stepped back. She didn't look at him. If he was hurt, there was nothing she could do about that. Knowing it would distract her. Kitty leaned in close to Peter.
Go, Kate. We will do our part. Then return to us, my love.
She nodded and walked over to the thin mattress. Here she would lie while her personality, her essence, was extracted and transmitted more than 20 years into the past. Or she would die, or her mind would arrive in a stranger's body. The possibilities for mistakes were endless.
We've assembled the jammer, but it won't work for long. Our timing must be perfect, and we're also going to need a bit of luck.
Yeah, just a bit.
The jammer sat on the floor next to the mat, at Rachel's left side. It looked a bit like a teapot on 3 short legs. Its case contained a small battery, a cluster of antennae, and a multi-spectrum wave interrupter. Just about any mutant power had an effect on some part of the electromagnetic spectrum, and the Sentinels were equipped with detectors keyed to the known patterns of surviving mutants. That was where the jammer came in. It would mask the use of their abilities, permitting Rachel to perform the psychic projection. It would also let the 6 of them take their inhibitor colors off. Then at least, they could put up a fight. Except, Kate thought to herself, only 5 of them would be taking off their inhibitor collars. She would be lying on the mattress. They'd rehearsed it, and they couldn't risk the time they'd lose getting her collar off before Rachel attempted the telepathic projection. and they weren't planning on putting up a fight right away. Their aim was first to escape. Then the fight would take care of itself.
Kate, I don't have to be a telepath to know that your mind is going in every direction at once. You need to be calm and focused if this is gonna work.
Easy for you to say.
Kate lay back on the mattress and closed her eyes, slowing her breathing and letting the chaotic swirl of her thoughts drain away until only one remained. She remembered being 13, the newest member of the X-Men. They had called her Sprite back then, and she hadn't had the confidence to tell Storm and the rest that she didn't like that codename very much, but she couldn't remember when she had changed it.
Okay, time to do this, if we're going to do it.
Franklin stood with one hand hovering over the switch of the jammer.
Rachel, are you ready?
I'm ready, but don't freak out if it doesn't happen right away. It'll probably take me a few minutes to gather Kate's consciousness and make sure I'm keeping it intact for the projection.
We'll stay out of your way.
Silence would be good. Okay, Franklin, turn it on.
Today, Wolverine banked the Blackbird around and dropped the plane into a steep approach to the landing strip at the perimeter of the federal Max X Penitentiary, a holding facility designed for superhumans who couldn't be kept in normal prisons. The X-Men had caught an alert 90 minutes ago that some kind of explosion or possible seismic event had collapsed part of the facility. Among several possible escapees was Fred J. Dukes, better known as the Blob, one of the original members of the Brotherhood of Mutants. With the so-called mutant hearings on tap in the Senate the next day, Storm had immediately decided that the X-Men needed to have a strong and visible presence at the site. She, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, Colossus, and Kitty Pryde were the response team.
It looks like a bomb went off. An entire wing is gone.
But there is no debris field scattered outward from the center of the collapse.
It is Blob. He has grown more powerful.
Blob could increase his mass and density to the point where it was impossible to move him. He was also practically impossible to harm physically. Now it seemed he had amplified his powers, becoming dense enough that his mass could bring down any structure designed to contain him. Kurt Wagner, Nightcrawler, looked down at the video screen.
He imploded the whole building? Where has he gone then?
Better put him underground next time.
You are a little too eager to kill, Wolverine.
I meant if he was under the ground and he dropped the building, it'd be on his own head and he wouldn't be able to walk out. Lighten up, Petey.
Perhaps your past actions led to my assumption, Logan.
Apology accepted.
Where are all the guards?
Max X was supposed to be under the control of the best soldiers a joint Special Forces SHIELD training program could produce. But the prison grounds were empty, and the front gate was open.
Can you contact the facility?
Already tried. Something's jamming the Max X frequency. I'm landing us.
The Blackbird landed on the parking lot outside the prison fence.
Hey!
You stay on the plane, kitten. We haven't taken the training wheels off you just yet.
Oh, that's not fair. I am an X-Man. You even gave me a nickname.
Oh yeah, right. Okay, stay on the plane, Sprite. Better? I'd never hear the end of it from Chucky X if I let you out into a gunfight and something happened. Watch and learn.
Wolverine held her gaze.
Got me?
Fine.
She spun away from him to go sulk in the co-pilot's chair. The four X-Men crossed the parking lot, seeing right away that more was wrong than just a collapsed wing of the prison complex. Bullet holes pockmarked some of the buildings nearest the gate, which wasn't just open, it had been blown off its hinges.
I smell blood.
The exterior doors of the prison complex burst open. Heavily armed mercenaries bearing the blank-faced masks of the Hellfire Club poured out, guns blazing. More mercenaries appeared in the prison's sentry towers with heavier single-fire sniper rifles. One of their shots punched through Peter's shoulder, spinning him around. He transformed into his organic steel form, and two more bullets ricocheted off him. Nightcrawler disappeared in a puff of smoke and reappeared in the midst of one of the enemy fire teams. He took three of them down and bamfed away again before they could react. Wolverine's approach was more straightforward. Head lowered, he charged into the midst of the closest group. Storm raised her arms and blew a fog into existence, obscuring herself as clouds appeared and darkened the sky. Rain began to fall.
Oh, man.
Inside the Blackbird, Kitty Pryde watched the battle in a state of pure anguish. She had to do something. The X-Men had welcomed her, saved her life, and now, when they were facing overwhelming odds, she wasn't out there to help. She couldn't stand it. She was ready to fight. She knew it. There were Hellfire Club mercenaries everywhere, outnumbering the X-Men by at least 10 to 1. But the prison guards, previously overwhelmed by the Hellfire assault, seemed emboldened by the X-Men's arrival. They fought their way out and rallied to defensive positions at the edges of the prison grounds. Colossus's organic steel body glinted in the sunlight, sparking with the impact of bullets. They staggered him, but couldn't hurt him. He lowered a shoulder and barreled into the wall under one of the sentry towers, toppling it into the guardhouse close to the gate.
Fastball special, Petey.
Wolverine sprinted across the prison courtyard. Colossus braced his feet and caught Wolverine in mid-leap, hurling him up to somersault into the sentry tower on the other side of the gate. The Hellfire sniper got off one last shot before Wolverine smashed him to the floor. A concentrated volley of machine gun fire tore into the tower just as Logan hit the floor.
Logan!
He wasn't invincible. None of them were. Kitty had to help. What kind of X-Men would she be if she just stood by and watched? Kitty phased, letting herself fall through the bottom of the Blackbird's fuselage and becoming solid again when her feet touched the ground. A detachment of Hellfire Club mercenaries was making a sweep around the perimeter fence, heading for the Blackbird.
Over by the plane!
One of them spotted her, and she barely phased in time for their fusillade of bullets to pass through her. She ducked behind the Blackbird's landing gear. Some kind of energy blast hit the landing gear and knocked her spinning. But she kept her feet and ran away from the Hellfire mercenaries into the pouring rain, reflexively heading for the monumental form of Colossus. He would protect her. Something hit her hard between the shoulder blades, and she sprawled forward, face down. She rolled over, waiting to see blood. Instead, she saw Logan. He leapt from the guard tower and flattened her, absorbing the brunt of the Hellfire Club's next volley himself. A normal man would have been shredded, but Wolverine was just mad. He tore into the Hellfire mercenaries and put the 6 of them down before Kitty managed to get back to her feet. Covered in blood, Wolverine turned to her.
I told you, kid. Stay on the damn plane. You're not ready for this yet.
He was pointing at her. He saw her staring at the blood on his claws. He drew them in.
Kid, you gotta listen. Hey!
Something else hit Kitty then, and she crumpled to the ground.
What the?
Logan spun around in a full circle. There were no other Hellfire mercenaries nearby. Nightcrawler bamfed into existence next to him.
What's his loss?
I don't know. She just dropped.
Logan knelt over Kitty. She was breathing, and he couldn't see any wounds.
I will tell Aurora.
Well, damn. Now I'm babysitting?
Not for long, as it turned out. Logan and Colossus had already reduced the number of Hellfire Club mercenaries by more than half. Now, not 10 seconds after Nightcrawler had vanished, a bolt of lightning blasted out of the sky, forking to strike the 4 remaining sentry towers and the perimeter fence to take out most of the Hellfire mercenaries who had the misfortune to be outside. In the ozone-smelling aftermath, the remaining mercenaries surrendered en masse. The battle continued from inside the complex for a bit, but soon it was over. Then the shield guards who had survived the initial attack emerged from their defensive position to gather the prisoners, freeing Colossus to turn his attention to Kitty and Logan.
She's out cold, but she doesn't look hurt. I don't know what the hell happened.
I will stay with her.
Good.
Logan took off, finishing the sweep of the prison grounds to see whether any of the other superhuman inmates had escaped. Along the way, he released some guards he found trapped in a partially collapsed wing of the main complex. Then he hurried to catch up with Aurora and Kurt. They were out near the prison's main gate, consulting with the warden, a career shield officer named Yargo with a gash splitting his crew cut and a bruised face.
Blob had his lawyer in yesterday. First we knew he had a lawyer. But hey, it's America. They talked for about an hour, then she left. Nothing unusual.
Huh. That's something unusual.
They all looked, and then they all froze. The Sentinel descended, slowly and precisely, from the skies over the southern Rockies. Keeping itself oriented toward the Blackbird, it touched down on the bare ground between the runway and the collapsed portion of the complex. Then it stood, watchful and still. It was one of the older models, perhaps rolled out by the master mold itself. Every mutant watching it got an uneasy sensation, all the way down in the base of the brain, the place where the fight-or-flight response lived. That was what the Sentinels meant to them.
If there's a Sentinel on the grounds, there's more going on here than just a jailbreak.
Colonel, is there anything you want to tell me?
No. Never seen it here before. Or any Sentinel. S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't use them. You guys know that.
Drawn by us using our powers, no doubt. Let's see what it has to say for itself.
Logan started walking toward it.
Logan, wait!
It had been some time since the X-Men had seen an active Sentinel. As Storm rose to its eye level, the Sentinel made no move to attack. She hovered perhaps 10 feet from it.
Sentinel, why are you here?
To observe mutants.
To observe only?
The nature of my orders is not to be disseminated to unauthorized parties.
And who are the authorized parties?
The roster of authorized parties is not to be disseminated to unauthorized parties.
We should just take it out, Ro.
Expression of hostile intent detected. Threat assessment underway.
There is no threat. We are only here to pursue the escaped prisoner Fred Dukes.
Observations will continue. Detection of hostile intent mandates ongoing threat assessment until confirmation of secure environment.
Yargo stepped forward.
Robot, I hear you talking about authorization, but I didn't authorize you being here. Nobody at S.H.I.E.L.D. did. Get off this property before we do our own threat assessment.
Expression of hostile intent detected.
The Sentinel looked down at Yargo.
Source non-mutant. Threat dismissed.
Oh, is that right?
Your support is noted and appreciated, Colonel. But let's not escalate this confrontation.
If that's how you want to play it, Miss Monroe. But my superiors are going to hear about this. I will not have this at my facility.
Blob's the only escapee, sir. This whole thing was targeted to him, looks like.
Let's make sure. Count again. And the minute we get power restored, everything's on lockdown until further notice. Your lightning did a number on our electrical grid.
Well, maybe next time we'll save your wiring and let the Hellfire Club trash the joint.
That's enough, Logan. Colonel Yargo, I'm sure you can appreciate that this kind of battle sometimes requires the use of blunt instruments. We'll be on our way soon. Blob will not have gotten far on his own. If he is in the vicinity, we will find him. If not, we will know there was some kind of coordinated effort to extract him.
By whom is the question? Has the Brotherhood reassembled?
We'll know soon enough. Right now, we've got a more pressing issue. Peter, what's Kitty's status?
She's starting to come around.
He helped Kitty to a sitting position. She opened her eyes and started to focus on her surroundings. It flooded over her, everything at once. The shock of clean air and bright sun. After long years in the polluted ruins of New York. The sensory feedback of her body, 13 years old. Before the decades of fighting and deprivation that had left their traces even on her resilient mutant physiology, she felt so light, so full of energy. Even colors seemed more vibrant, from the lustrous green of the shrubs lining the runway to the rich dark blue of Nightcrawler's skin.
Kurt, you're alive!
In a sharp, dissonant moment, she remembered him dead, lying in the mud at the edge of the camp's barracks, rain falling on his face.
So it would appear, Captain. Was there ever any doubt?
She scrambled to her feet. How light she was, how nimble. She looked around.
Where are we? This isn't New York.
Closest town is Deming, New Mexico.
Oh. I thought...
Kate looked down at herself.
I'm 13. It worked!
Then she spun around to fling herself into Colossus's arms.
Peter!
Oh, yes, Kitty?
Storm put a hand on Kate's shoulder.
Kitty, are you all right? Did you hit your head? Did something happen?
Did it ever? It was time for Kate to get a grip on herself and get on with the mission. There was literally no time to waste.
You're never gonna believe this, but I'm not Kitty. I'm Kate.
She hit her head all right.
She knew to expect this reaction, but Kate could already feel the first hints of frustration. She tried to stay focused.
No, Logan, I can't believe it worked. This is gonna sound crazy, but I'm not Kitty. At least I haven't gone by that name in a long time, since just a few years from now.
We must get her to a medical facility.
No, Peter, I'm fine. Listen, this is my 13-year-old body, but I'm Kate. I'm 35 and my mind has been sent back through time to warn you. The future is...
She looked again at Nightcrawler. Almost more than the proprioceptive shock of being in her adolescent body again, the sight of him was hard to wrap her head around.
Kurt, I saw you die. It was...
Your first combat experience can be a shock. That's why we wanted you to stay in the Blackbird. We thought it best for you to just observe until you had progressed a little further in your danger room training.
The danger room?
Kate hadn't thought of the danger room in, well, years.
So, Professor Xavier, he's still alive?
He's very much alive, yes. He's in Washington, about to testify before the Senate.
That's exactly why I'm here! The Senate! The Brotherhood is going to attack the hearing and assassinate Senator Kelly and Professor Xavier and Moira. When that happens, a whole new series of Sentinels are going to be unleashed. And in 20 years, there won't be a dozen mutants left alive in North America.
Paranoia worthy of Magneto. Our kitten is scared out of her mind.
Yes, I am. And you would be too if you'd seen what I've seen. We live in a concentration camp in the Bronx. The Sentinels are almost finished with their work. You have to believe me. If we don't do something, the Professor and Senator Kelly will be dead by the end of the day. And it'll be too late to change anything. Kurt, you mentioned Magneto. He's still alive but crippled. He's in a wheelchair, but he helped Rachel prepare to send me back. She's the only telepath left.
Who's Rachel?
Rachel Summers. She's Scott's... Cyclops' daughter. Where is Scott anyway? Oh, right. I remember. Jean.
Yeah, Jean. Psych has taken himself a little mental health sabbatical. We all could use one after the Dark Phoenix business, but hey, someone has to mind the store. Also, you know Scotty doesn't have any kids, right?
Let her talk, Logan.
Scott dies. Not right away. Later, when the Sentinels really take over.
Oh yeah? And how about the rest of us?
Storm and Peter are still alive. You too, Logan. You're the only one who's not in the camp. Also, Magneto's there, like I said. And Franklin.
Franklin Richards?
That's right.
Every question they asked gave her a little more hope that they were starting to believe her.
But Reed and Sue are both gone, along with Ben and Johnny. The Sentinels didn't just kill a few mutants. They decided the best way to control the mutant threat was to eliminate all opposition. There's a graveyard in the camp. I walk by it every day.
She looked around.
This feels so strange. To be only 13 again. And to know everything that's going to happen to all of us.
Her gaze lingered on Peter for a long moment.
What is it?
Oh no.
Over his shoulder, Kate saw the Sentinel.
Something went wrong. This is the wrong path. The Sentinels are already loose.
Seeing it triggered an ingrained flight reflex.
Whoa, kid!
She phased right through Logan and ran blindly away from the Sentinel, across the cleared ground toward the brushy hills. Anywhere to escape. Nightcrawler teleported into her path.
Warten Sie, Katzchen! You're safe! You're safe!
She phased through him, too, before collapsing to her knees.
The Sentinels!
Storm landed alongside Kurt.
Kitten! You've had a shock. Try to calm yourself.
I'm not Kitten! I'm Kate! Don't tell me to be calm. You don't know what they've done!
Logan and Peter caught up to the three of them and stood looking down at her. She had to get herself under control. They were never going to believe her if she couldn't handle herself.
Give her a moment.
What do you mean about the Sentinels? It's weird that one showed up here, but that's the only one I've seen lately. They're not doing anything.
They're not?
Kate had to not panic. She had to focus. But it wasn't easy, with the stress of her last few hours now being routed through the hormonal hair trigger of adolescence. This was part of the projection that she had considered intellectually, without really being prepared for it. Her entire body felt like it might fly apart from pure nervous energy.
That's the only Sentinel you've seen? Please, tell me again.
That is the only Sentinel we've seen.
Hearing Peter's voice settled Kate's nerves a little. She reached for him.
You've always been the one I can count on.
Peter caught Storm's warning glance and held her at arm's length.
You can count on all of us, Kitty. We are all X-Men.
That's not what I mean.
She'd been about to tell him about their future together, their marriage, the children they'd had and lost. But she held herself back. How would Peter react? What effect would that knowledge have on him in the battle that was coming? That secret, Kate decided, was just one more part of the burden she had assumed when she had agreed to this desperate plan.
It's all just... it's too much. I can't handle this.
You can, and you will, because you must.
I don't know if I'm buying this.
Logan, you saved my life.
Just doing my job, kid.
No, I mean in the future. We were supposed to meet because you'd gotten the last component of the device we needed to deactivate the inhibitor collars. On the way to our meeting, I was attacked. You saw it happen and you saved me. It was on Park Avenue.
You got mugged on Park Avenue?
You don't know what New York is like now. It's in ruins. There are gangs everywhere. They prey on anyone they think is a mutant or might carry a mutant gene. They can spot us by our collars and uniforms.
Kate's hand reflexively went to her throat.
I don't have mine on.
Kitten, listen. Nobody has to wear a collar.
No, you listen. If you don't, you will have to wear one.
Well, she sure has gotten lippy just now. That's not like her. But I still don't believe it. No offense, kid, but I think you're just scared and got your bell rung.
Perhaps. But her reaction to the Sentinel... Had we even begun telling her about them before this? Did she even know they existed?
I don't know. Ask her.
If what she says is true, this is not 13-year-old Kitty.
Now that is an interesting question. Kitty, or Kate, if you're here, what has happened to Kitty? Where is she?
With me, I guess. I mean, with my body. God, I hope she's all right. This is hard enough for me. I can only imagine what it would be like for her.
Look, whatever we're gonna do about Kit Kat, we're not gonna do it here. Charlie Xavier needs to know about the ambush, and he'll want to hear about the Sentinel, too. I say we get moving.
Yes.
Storm put an arm around Kate's shoulders.
Tell us more. Keep talking, kitten.
It's Kate.
All right, Kate. I'll try to remember that.
They walked quickly back to the Blackbird. Kate tried not to look at the Sentinel, and she was glad when she boarded the plane, where it wouldn't be able to see her. After Rachel finished the psychic projection of Kate Pride back in time, it took less than 30 minutes for the group to shed their collars, gather anything useful they could carry in their pockets, and leave the South Bronx Mutant Internment Center. For the last time, with any luck. The Sentinels had not detected Rachel's telepathic exercise. They stood outside the fence, watching as always. But as a rule, they paid little attention to what went on inside the camp, unless there was an outbreak of violence. Rachel winced a little as they walked. The projection had left her with a fierce headache. Franklin stayed close to her. The other three, Peter, Aurora, and Magneto in his rickety wheelchair, followed in a loose group behind them, Peter carrying the unconscious Kate.
Did it work, Rachel?
I think it did.
She glanced over her shoulder.
I felt the teenage Kitty, just for a second, right at the end. I don't know what happened to her. I hope...
Don't, Rachel. Don't do that to yourself. Second guessing will kill us.
Rachel didn't respond. They strolled along, not hurrying, doing nothing to draw attention from the Sentinels or the other inmates, most of whom were clustered in groups for safety around barrel fires or at the doorways of the barracks. The mutants angled toward the perimeter fence closest to 161st Street, looking for the marker that Logan was supposed to have left the night before.
There.
All of them saw it, a newspaper box lying on its side between the street and the sidewalk. It marked the place where less than 3 feet below the asphalt surface of the former parking lot, a subway maintenance tunnel angled onto the campgrounds. Storm drains just inside the fence were big enough to admit a person. The plan was simple. Logan would push one of the grates off, and they would get down into the drain as quickly as possible, then follow it to a maintenance door. That would lead to an old storage room between the storm sewers and the subway tunnel, with access to both. From there they would head south, toward the Baxter Building. The storm grate ahead of them shifted and rose slowly out of its frame. Aurora looked around for the two nearest sentinels, maybe 50 yards away on either side of the newspaper box. Neither of them appeared to have noticed.
Let's go.
Logan's head and arms appeared as he gently set the crate down next to the open drain. It was going to work. Rachel felt a ripple of pure elation, both at the idea of freedom and at the yearned-for possibility that she might at last have balanced the karmic scales. She couldn't bring back the mutants she had hunted down, but maybe she could do something better. And that was when Kate's eyes blinked open.
Shut her up!
The sentinels along the fence turned to look. Peter clapped a hand over her mouth. She thrashed in his arms.
Kate, it is all right. Shh. Peter's here.
So were a lot of sentinels. We better move faster.
Go.
Rachel and Franklin ran, disappearing into the storm drain.
Alert! Alert! Detainees attempting escape. Alert! Alert!
All of the sentinels were on full alert now, and once they powered up their repulsors, they would lay down a devastating concentration of fire. The X-Men had to get out before that happened. An energy beam blasted a large irregular crater in the asphalt between Peter and the drain. He put a hand out to break his fall, inadvertently uncovering Kate's mouth.
Peter, what happened to you? Where are we? What's going on?
Twisting around, Kate saw Storm.
Aurora, what's happening?
Mutants. Any attempt to escape will be cause for termination.
One of the sentinels was less than 30 yards away. Storm whirled and raised her arms, summoning lightning that seemed to come from every part of the sky at once. It crackled along the entire length of the fence, blasting into every sentinel patrolling there. They were staggered, but the backup sentinels coming from within the camp were not. Another sentinel's beam went past Peter, who transformed into his steel form and, holding Kate with one arm, threw the first piece of broken concrete he found back at the sentinel. It shattered the lens on its torso repulsor. Peter hurled more pieces of rock and debris at the approaching sentinels, trying to buy Magneto some time while carrying Kate toward the drain. The broken ground was difficult for Magnus's wheelchair. While the sentinels at the fence were still recovering, the ones inside the compound would make short work of him. One of them stomped straight through a nearby barracks from its post deeper in the camp. They were coming from all directions. Soon they would have the mutants trapped in the open space between the fence and the barracks.
The mutants are not wearing inhibitor collars.
Peter, put me down! Please put me down!
He knelt and turned his broad back to the oncoming sentinel, shielding the woman he loved.
Kate, are you back already? Did it work? What did Xavier say?
What are you talking about? Where are we? Back from what? Peter, what's going on? And nobody's ever called me Kate in my life! What's happening?
Oh my god.
It hit him then. Rachel had not just projected Kate's psyche back into Kitty, she had switched the two of them in each other's bodies, or more precisely, into the temporally distant versions of their own bodies. Storm was at the edge of the drain.
Peter! Get her in here!
A blast from another sentinel hit Peter a glancing blow. His organic steel body absorbed and dissipated the heat, but the impact knocked him forward. He let go of her.
Okay, my love, run!
Something strange happened to her face when she heard the term of endearment. If they hadn't been in the middle of a combined jailbreak and battle for the lives of the entire human race, Peter might well have died of embarrassment. Of course she couldn't know they were married. And what must he have sounded like saying that to a girl of 13?
The guy in the wheelchair, he's getting stuck! Oh my god, is that Magneto?
Yes, we have few allies now and need all we have.
You need him? For what?
Are you looking around, you girl? There are maybe 10 living mutants on this continent, and we are all about to be killed by sentinels. Having Magneto on our side is not the oddest thing you will see tonight, if we live to see the rest of tonight.
Peter immediately felt miserable for yelling at her. Storm had already gone down through the drain. Peter, Kate, and Magneto were the last three. Getting through the drainage opening would be impossible in his steel form. He would have to transform back just as he approached, and hope that the Sentinels didn't pick him off in the moment between his transformation and his disappearance into the haven of New York's stormwater system.
Kate, Kitty, whichever, let's go!
But when he looked back, not only was she not following him, she was going back for Magneto. The damn chair would be the death of him. He supposed it was only right that he should die in a wheelchair, having been responsible for Charles dying in one. Karma, some might call it, or poetic justice. What Magneto called it was death. There were 4 sentinels within striking distance. Although Aurora had disabled a number of the others with her lightning strike, those 4 would be more than enough to eliminate him.
Magneto!
Something had changed in Kate, in her posture, and then he knew.
Rachel, you have outdone yourself.
He pushed himself toward her.
Don't be stupid, girl! Go!
She was less than 20 feet away now. Behind her, Colossus had turned around as well, and was returning for him.
Peter! I forbid this! You must survive! Get out of here!
Colossus ignored him, and a moment later the world around all 3 of them disappeared in thunder and fire.